Greetings to all of you from Iora Ecological Solutions. Iora is a leading environmental advisory firm in India with expertise in natural resource conservation, climate change mitigation, and adaptation. I am Dr. Priyamvada Bagaria, Senior Manager under the Research and Consultancy Wing, specializing in landscape ecology and ecosystem services. We have been interacting for over a month now. We were supposed to be joined by Dr. Madhu Verma, under whom I work here. Dr. Verma is credited with valuation of tiger habitats and for pioneering recommendations for ecological fiscal transfers through the 13th, 14th, 15th Finance Commissions. Dr. Verma is unable to join the discussion today due to certain exigencies at her end. Before proceeding with the panel introduction, I will take a quick moment to introduce the project. It is titled as Integrated Assessment of Land-Based Mitigations for Strategic Mitigation and Economic Sustainability. The aim of this assessment is to draw an evidence-backed strategic roadmap for implementation of LBM interventions. In our past dialogues, we have tried finding answers to some pertinent questions on the contextual appropriateness of land-based mitigation, their connectedness with ecosystems and human well-being, and any kind of hindrances in terms of policy, finance, capacity building, or technology, and how we can mend those gaps. We have in the past dialogues discussed the role of multiple stakeholders, how communities can be onboarded into these projects, what is the role of forestry, and what are the various co-benefits of land-based mitigation projects. It can be air quality improvement, habitat connectivity, or community livelihood enhancement. In today's dialogue, we are happy to bring together eminent professionals from media and journalism. Today, we seek to discuss with our panel the power of storytelling in capturing climate perspectives and reporting experiences from the grassroots level. In the panel, we have with us Ms. Nidhi Jamwal. She's a senior independent journalist. She's based in Mumbai. She has experience reporting on the environment, climate, and rural issues. Formerly, she was with Gaon Connection and Down to Earth. Her award-winning work has been featured in leading national platforms, including Scroll, The Wire, Down to Earth. She has been recognized for pioneering reporting on gendered climate solutions and community stewardship. She has received multiple national and international honors. I will be mentioning just a couple of them, but we have a longer list. She's got the award for UNFPA at 50 Special Ladli Award in 2024 and the IHCAP CMS Environment Journalist Award in 2019. There's a longer list. We welcome you on board, Ms. Nidhi. It's a pleasure to have you with us in this panel. We have with us Ms. Uzmi Athar. She is Chief Correspondent with the Press Trust of India. She is an award-winning journalist with over a decade of reporting, renowned for breaking news, investigative reporting, and impactful multimedia storytelling. Her award-winning work has appeared in leading global outlets, including the Reuters, the Washington Post, and the Independent. Her work has influenced policy and driven reforms. Among her long list of numerous accolades, I will be just mentioning the Kushro Irani Prize for Environmental Reporting in 2024. We welcome you, Ms. Uzmi. We have with us Varsha Singh. She's an independent journalist based in Dehradun with over a decade of experience reporting on the Himalayan region's environment, wildlife, and community issues. Her work has appeared in Down to Earth, BBC Hindi, The Third Pole, Monga Bay, and other national outlets. She has earned fellowships with TERI, Land Conflict Watch, News Laundry, among many others. She's also a recipient of the Ladli Media Award for Gender Sensitivity in 2021. And she brings a strong focus on climate, biodiversity, and data-driven environmental reporting. We welcome you on the panel, Ms. Varsha. Next, we have with us Mr. Badri Chatterjee. He is a strategic communications specialist currently with Common Ground. Previously, for over 9 years, he was with Hindustan Times, and which also included stints with CNBC and Asar. He works at the intersection of environmental governance, rural livelihoods, and clean energy transitions, and brings strong expertise in building narratives, media engagement, and ecosystem-wide communications. He specializes in crafting communication frameworks, knowledge playbooks, and distributed storytelling networks. We welcome you on the panel, Mr. Badri. To moderate the discussions in this panel, we have with us Ms. Sharmishta Singh, who is a Prince 2 certified project manager, having a decade of wildlife conservation communication experience. As a consultant at the Wildlife Institute of India, she has led outreach and knowledge initiatives for UNDP and ADB projects. Her work bridges science, policy, and public engagement to drive biodiversity conservation. And we could not find anyone better than Sharmishta to moderate this panel for us. Now, over to you, Sharmishta.
Thank you, Priyamvada, for that introduction. A warm welcome to everyone joining us today. It feels meaningful that we are having this conversation during India's Wildlife Week, which celebrates coexistence and shared responsibility. As someone who has been working in conservation communications, I often think about how much power a story really has. And because these stories we tell decide what people believe is important. Climate change isn't new anymore. It's the language around it that often keeps people out. And as Priyamvada has already mentioned, and we also saw in the Iora's LinkedIn post, when we use all these words like mitigation, adaptation, or land degradation, most people, they see only like wells drying or their crops failing, their cities heating up. And it is our job as communicators, whether in the media, research, or policy, that how do we connect those realities? And this is what our dialogue today is really about, how communication itself can drive climate action. And we already have heard about this remarkable panelists who are joining us. So let's straight get into our discussion. Uh, we'll start with the heart of journalism, which is storytelling. How do you bring climate stories alive so that they connect with people and move them to care? To begin with, I think Ms. Nidhi Jambal is the perfect person to begin with because she's been covering this for decades now. You've covered stories with your experiences about the reports on the Tavi River floods and the revival of Delhi's lakes and reservoirs. And your stories stand out for their detail and the focus on the people. Nidhi, we'd like to know, how do you decide which stories to spotlight and how do you build trust with communities whose voices make your stories so real? It would be great to have your feedback on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharmishta. And thanks, Iora, for making me a part of this conversation. As far as climate stories is concerned and storytelling around climate and environment issues is concerned, I think we are very lucky because we started journalism at a time when there was nothing called environmental journalism or climate journalism in this country. This is like about 25 years back. So I think the way we got trained to find these environment stories, because at that time these stories were not important, everybody was talking about other things. So because I started my journalism career with Down to Earth magazine, which was completely dedicated to environment and science, so I think I really want to give credit to the editors at that time who actually trained people like me to find environment stories. Now I'll tell you what they used to tell us. It's a funny story. They would tell us, if you're looking at a newspaper, forget the front page, just dive deeper into the page 7, 8, 9, 10. Find, stories which are placed, like a 100-word story placed around, some obituary or some advertisements or something like that. Those were actually the stories which were the key environment stories of the 90s and of the 2000s, which then we followed up and we figured out how big those stories were. I just want to give a quick example that there was a very small, I think some 150 word story in some national Delhi, and which said that a PIL has been filed in Allahabad High Court regarding contaminated drinking water, which some villages in Sonbhadra district of UP are drinking. So it was a very small story, and my editor told me, let's dig deeper and let's find out what this PIL is. And so I just traveled to Allahabad. After reaching Allahabad, I realized that this is the area which is on the border of Uttar Pradesh and Jharkhand, Sonbhadra district, Naxalite affected area. And when we went there, we realized that entire area had high fluoride in its groundwater. I was shocked because Rohiniya Damar, I still remember that village, all the tribal children in that village were crippled. They all had bow-shaped legs. Women in that village were actually might be 30, 35 years old, but they were all, bent on their back and they were walking like that. It was a shocking thing. And this was, I'm talking of 2002, when I was very young into this whole thing. So it really disturbed me. And that's how I figured that those are the stories, which at the time mainstream media was really not interested in, but we would pick those smaller clues and then just go hunting and find the bigger story and try and, put spotlight in those areas. So I think that's one way of how do you find your stories. And then over a period of time, you start developing a nose for a story. So now you look at something and there is something deeper into it. The other way of storytelling, I just want to quickly say also, is that where you look at, you don't as journalists always have to look at smaller things and then find a story. Sometimes something like what's happened in North India, in the Himalayas this year, where we've had extreme weather event, cloudbursts, landslides, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. But then the thing is with storytelling is that when everybody is talking about rivers flooding and landslides happening, how do you find a new angle to that story? How is your storytelling going to be different from what everybody else is talking about? So that's where, can you bring some science angle? Can you look at Western disturbances or monsoon? So the thing is, everybody's talking of the same thing, but how do you find a new angle in your storytelling so that people actually watch it, listen to it, and of course it has to connect to people's everyday lives. It has to make sense. Why should I be worried about if Marathwada has had terrible floods this year? So that connection is very, very important, which I feel a lot of time we journalists fail to make, which is where our stories possibly do not get read that much. But I'll just take a pause at that, Amishta.
That makes complete sense, and also how that helps you connect with the communities because you're reporting about something that affects them. So on that, we'll also I'd like to ask Usmi. Usmi, many of your stories focus on women, and we had all these days to look up. A lot of your reporting is about how these self-help groups help these women, build resilience to and also how it affects their health. A lot of these stories that are climate change related. But what was really striking of was that you're not just pointing out the problems that these women are facing, but also like how are they helping themselves, and how do you keep this balance, showing both vulnerability and leadership, so that women are not always framed as victims in your stories. They also are like the heroes of your stories. And it was really interesting to see you've covered a lot of stories like that. Usni, some points from you about it, please.
Hi, Sarmishta. Previously, I think I was muted, so I was not able to convey my greetings to you.
No.
And yes, this question is at the heart of my reporting. I think the portrayal of women as victims comes from the Sati Savitri image that have been imposed on us for generations. So yes, that is something which has been troubling me since the very beginning, because I try not to frame women as passive victims, but as problem solvers. So in rural India, I have met women who are adapting farming practices, reviving traditional seeds, and building savings groups to deal with climate shocks. But I mean, as you just mentioned, that we are looking at them as victims, that how are they surviving. So what I generally do is that I would begin with the story. My first question would be, tell me what your day looks like, what time you wake up, what is the whole thing. And believe me, there are so many interesting points there which actually helps you to connect with those women. And from then there, I like the blow up the whole picture about how they are doing something exceptional that is not expected of so-called women who are often portrayed as victims. Another thing which I try to do is that I try to bring men's perspective, so the story doesn't sit in a silo. So because it is about social transformation, it is not about gender alone. So that is another part. And I think a key issue here is that you need to spend as much time as possible with them. You need to understand what their life is like, because I think in journalism, especially in mainstream journalism, we try to paint everyone with the same brush, which is not true. Every one of them have a different story, have a different struggle, which I think when told properly, it comes out beautifully.
Absolutely right, Asmi. It's so interesting to see that you go and find these very positive stories, and it was really eye-opening for all of us to read also. Now that we've had Nidhi talking about how to find stories and how a story builds up another story, because when you went looking in Sonbhadra and you found this other story, and then we have Usmi who's talking about these positive stories and not showing people as victims but also as heroes. The same way, let's cover about urban storytelling. And here I'd like to bring Badri into the conversation. Badri, we went through your articles, and you've written a lot about urban climate issues, from plastic waste to heat, cooling, and clean air. We often think of land-based mitigation as something rural. It's about forests and farming, but cities also shape how land and resources are used. How do you see storytelling from cities influencing both policymakers and citizens to make urban spaces more climate resilient? Like, what draws you towards urban storytelling, please?
Thanks, Amistad. I just wanted to thank Iora also for having me here. I just wanted to put off something where we have an esteemed panel of journalists who are actively reporting, going to the field. I am no longer one of them, so I'm towards that communication side of it. But yeah, I do definitely try and put out some stories from time to time. Going back to one of the stories that you mentioned from Mumbai more specifically, I think one of the things is that if you see the current scenario and what is happening is that within urban spaces, the kind of reporting is sort of driven with the focus of how the decision makers or the government is pulling out multiple different reports, multiple different action plans. But there is a continuation to that, which is a follow up of actually seeing the implementation of all of this. And unfortunately, if you see whichever city within the country, and you have the seasonality of the number of different extreme events that are happening all across, we are sort of not going, in that frame to understand whether those plans are actually being implemented on the ground. There is big talk about sponge cities, like developing sponges within the city which will absorb excess water. There's talk about this Miyawaki plantations and so on within cities. But are we actually identifying what the residents are going to be actually impacted through because of all of this? When there is 200 plus rainfall in a particular city, is the drainage capacity enough to cater to that? So I think for me, those were some of the major elements to highlight. So the civic issues have a direct bearing on environmental issues. But as Nidhi was pointing out initially, environment journalism wasn't a beat per se up to about say 10, 15 years back. So now you have a dedicated focus on the difference between what civic impacts or things connected to the civic decision making process versus what the environmental issues are. So bringing them, marrying them in terms of identifying what could be the solutions, I think is very, very important. The other thing I think is that this constant flow of reporting and not limiting it to just one of these one-off events is something which is crucial now. To understand the difference between when we're reporting something around weather, whether it is like about introducing climate, it has to be backed by science-based evidence. So those, if highlighted through lived realities of what citizens are facing, I think decision makers have that onus on acting upon them. I think that's something that is crucial to be highlighted in the regular story. That's top.
You're right, Badri. It's the reality of policies is what we'll look at. And with that, we'll also see how regional voices and languages affect storytelling, especially when it comes to climate change. We have Varsha Singh with us, who's also a senior journalist. Varsha, your reports from the mountains, you report from the mountains and often write in Hindi also. Why do you think it's important to tell climate stories in regional languages and from local landscapes? How does that change how people understand or relate to the issue? Do you think that makes a difference? How does it help? We would love to hear your take on it.
Thank you all for having me here, and this is very important dialogue series. So I believe such important conversations should happen regularly. Um, so um, so for me, like to connect with my audience, as a journalist, I observe what's happening around me in my state, my region, and on the issues that interest of me. And in the Himalayan landscape, some challenges are like constant shadow, forest fire, melting glacier, glow events, disasters in every monsoon. Wildlife, migration issues. So these issues are always there, and whenever they happen, there's a lot of talk about them in the media and in the public, but mostly on the surface, and then the attention shifts to something else. लेकिन जब मैं इन मुद्दों पर काम कर रही होती हूँ, मैं इन पर लिख रही होती हूँ, तो मैं खासतौर पर ये स्टोरीज बहुत लेयर्स में होती हैं। जब भी कोई जंगल में आग लगती है या कोई आपदा आती है, तो मैं उस इशू के पीछे जो साइंस है वो समझने की कोशिश कर रही होती हूँ। लोग उससे कैसे डील कर रहे हैं, जिन पर आमतौर पर कोई बात नहीं होती है। समाधान के तौर पर क्या किया जा रहा है, लोग खुद किस तरह से इस चैलेंज को ले रहे हैं। तो हिमालय क्षेत्र की समस्याओं की कई लेयर्स हैं, और मैं उन लेयर्स के बीच में अपनी कहानियों को देखने की कोशिश कर रही होती हूँ। तो लोग जो हैं वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट कैरेक्टर होते हैं मेरी स्टोरी में अमूमन। और जैसे मिसाल के तौर पर मैं एक स्टोरी का एग्जांपल देना चाहूंगी कि जब भी अभी मैंने इस साल ही फॉरेस्ट फायर को लेकर एक स्टोरी की, तो मैंने देखा कि कम्युनिटी, खासतौर पर जो पहाड़ की महिलाएं हैं, वो जंगल की आग से जुड़ी जो सूचना है, जो इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम है, उसको बहुत स्ट्रेंथन करने के लिए काम कर रही हैं। और फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट भी बहुत ही मतलब वेल अवेयर है कि महिलाएं रोजमर्रा के काम से जंगल के आसपास समय बिताती हैं। तो दोनों को कैसे उनके इस जो इनका महिलाओं का जो ये योगदान है, उसको कैसे वो इस्तेमाल भी कर रहे हैं और जंगल को बेहतर बनाने के लिए काम कर रहे हैं। तो महिलाओं को मिलाकर टेक्नोलॉजी के साथ व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप क्रिएट करके, वो एक फॉरेस्ट ऐप क्रिएट करके, तो किस तरह से डिपार्टमेंट ने कोशिश की, किस तरह से महिलाओं ने कोशिश की कि जंगल की आग से जुड़ी सूचनाओं के इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम को बेसिकली मजबूत बनाया जा सके। और तो जब ये क्योंकि हमेशा जो हम आमतौर पर जब फॉरेस्ट फायर सीजन होगा, तो हम कहानियां देखते हैं कि जंगल में आग लगी, इतने हेक्टेयर जंगल जल गए, इतने लोग, इतने लाख का नुकसान हुआ, चिड़ के जंगल की वजह से आग लगी। बहुत सतही रिपोर्टिंग होती है, ज्यादातर समय, हमेशा नहीं होती। तो आप कैसे अपनी स्टोरीज को उसके भीतर देखते हैं कि जो असल समस्या है वो क्या है। ऐसे में एक और एग्जांपल से अपनी बात को ज्यादा बेहतर तरीके से कहना चाहूंगी कि मैंने अभी इस साल ही एक स्टोरी की, ग्लॉफ के खतरे को लेकर बहुत बात हो रही है इस समय, और अभी हमने हाल ही में बहुत सारे ऐसे इश्यूज भी देखे हैं। तो उत्तराखंड में भी एक झील है वसुधरा ताल, जिसे लेकर साइंटिस्ट कम्युनिटी के बीच में बहुत सारी बातें हो रही हैं। तो मैंने भी जानने की कोशिश की कि वसुधरा ताल है क्या, वो कौन से गांव होंगे पहाड़ में जो उसकी जद में आएंगे, तो कम्युनिटी कैसे इस खतरे को ले रही है। और मैं उन गाँव में पहुंची जहाँ पर जो इस खतरे में आ सकते थे, और जब मैंने लोगों से बातचीत की, तो पता चला कि उन्हें किसी भी तरह की झील के बारे में या वसुधरा ताल लेक जिसको लेकर इतनी चर्चा हो रही है, इसके बारे में जानकारी नहीं है, जबकि ये वो लोग हैं जो वहां रह रहे हैं। तो और या फिर जो अर्ली वार्निंग सिस्टम है, या आपदा की स्थिति में कोई सुरक्षित शेल्टर हो, तो उसके बारे में एक तो अवेयरनेस भी नहीं है, और इस बारे में वो बात भी नहीं करते, क्योंकि और स्थानीय स्तर पर इसकी कोई मांग भी नहीं है। तो कई बार ये हमारा इंफॉर्मेशन शेयरिंग होता है कि जब हम बहुत सारे साइंटिफिक रिसर्च पेपर्स पढ़ रहे हैं, हम जो कि क्लाइमेट चेंज, एडेप्टेशन, क्लाइमेट मिटिगेशन जैसी बातें कर रहे हैं, तो हम भी अपनी नॉलेज को उनके साथ शेयर कर रहे होते हैं। और ज़्यादातर समय तो हमें बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट जो इंफॉर्मेशन मिलती है वो कम्युनिटी से ही मिलती है, क्योंकि वही वहाँ पर मौजूद हैं जो पहले जो चेंजेस है जिनको वो नोटिस कर रहे हैं, और जिनको वो अपनी अपनी तरह से डील कर रहे हैं। तो as and when as a journalist we cover these issues, reach out to those people, talk to them, listen to their stories, understand how they deal with these challenges and what kind of solutions they bring, including community science. So it ultimately create a deeper understanding and strengthen the conversation around these issues which of national interest also.
You are correct, Varsha, and you brought out a very important point, how to make climate science simple, accurate, and relatable. And using a vernacular language or Hindi makes that connection perfect. So, in this part about how to make climate science simple, my first question is again, you're back to Nidhi. Nidhi, we've read pieces of yours on cloudburst, lightning, and urbanization, and these pieces they bring together science and storytelling quite beautifully. As someone who isn't a scientist, how do you make sure your stories are scientifically accurate but still easy to read and emotionally engaging for people? Is there some how do you go about it? We'd love to hear it because we do have people joining us today who might want to write in the future. So, is there something that you would like to tell us about how you go about simplifying science?
Sure, sure. Thanks, Sharmishta, for that question. So again, to me, when I look at stories, right now we talk a lot about science journalism, data journalism. So like now, you have all these kind of silos, I would say, that have been created. But again, when we started off as journalists, all this was part of just one story. So it was understood that if you're reporting on something, you would look at the science of it. Like again, if I go back to the example of Rohiniya Damar, which had high fluoride in its groundwater, it was natural you would look at the science. Why does that area have high fluoride? And then you would of course look at tech. Are there any tech solutions? You would of course look at data. What are the standards for fluoride in groundwater? What is safe level? What is unsafe level? So all that, I think any story is not complete to my mind unless you have looked at all these layers. And even Varsha has beautifully said that how there are all these layers in the story. Now when one looks at again, I'm not a scientist. I have not even done MSc or anything like that to be able to do these stories. So my whole thing has been that build bridges with scientific community. Now, initially, 2 decades back, scientists were mostly not very open to speaking to journalists because one is they felt that speaking to journalists trivialized the climate science, and they also felt that they will be misquoted. So a lot of time initially when we used to reach out to the scientists, they would say, no, we don't want to speak to you guys don't understand science, so we don't want to speak to somebody who's not studied science. So but what has happened now is in the past, I would say 15 years, climate change is, if I can say, blessing in disguise, in the sense that now scientists are forced to speak to journalists. They have figured that they cannot continue, publishing peer-reviewed research papers, and that's not the end of their work. They have to speak to the journalists, they have to communicate, and they have to ensure that whatever they are researching, whatever is their finding, reaches the masses. So now it's become easier for journalists to reach out. So what I do is, if I'm working on any story, suppose if I'm working on a story on how Indian Ocean is warming up and there are marine heat waves, I will, if there is a research paper, I will find out who are the authors. And usually the research paper also has emails of author of the scientists. So you reach out to them, and just the basic thing of journalism, ask questions. I think everything just boils down to that. Because, and the good thing is, when you don't understand complex science, you want to ask very, very basic questions, which means those questions will also arise in the minds of common people. So I think that's again a good thing when you don't have a huge scientific background. Once I remember I was working on a story on thunderstorms in North India, in Delhi. A lot of people had also died at that time, pre-monsoon thunderstorms. And I spoke with some scientist, and I was feeling very awkward that, I might ask him stupid question, how a thunderstorm is formed. And I told him, I'm sorry, maybe I'm asking a very silly question. And that scientist was so good. And he told me, Nidhi, there are no silly questions. I may or may not be able to answer what you're asking, but it's important you ask, because then only we will also try and find answers to that. So I think that's like one mantra which has really helped me to work on science story. Reach out to the scientists. Because of climate change, more and more scientists want to speak to journalists. So we should take this opportunity, reach out to them, ask questions to them, read papers where we don't understand, just ask them for clarification. And my personal experience of interacting with scientists in the last 1 decade has been really good. They can be excellent teachers. Some of my best stories, I would say, on weather, if I have done, it's only because some scientists had actually helped break down the things and explained it to me so that I can further explain to to my readers. So I'll just pause at that.
Maybe that's so interesting to hear that. And so great that people are far more open to discussing the science now with the journalists. And I think that really immensely helps you in reporting now. And, when we come to complex terminologies, I have to bring in Badri here again, because we were going through some of your articles, Badri, and you're reporting on forecasting systems and emissions data. These involve a lot of dense material. Would love to know what's your process of turning technical research into stories that a non-specialist reader can connect with? Like, how do you go about it?
So I think part of that has already been responded by Nidhi
Yes.
when she mentioned, a structure of how you actually delve deeper into those conversations.
Yes.
And I think the core element is to, sort of identify, those statistical structures on, the dense, data sets that, they've been provided.
Yes.
They're mostly lost in those peer-reviewed structures, like, those journals that are being published. How is it that, we talk to them and actually try to identify what the story could be? Another way is to actually connect it to the lived experience itself. Can we actually identify the data and look at an example from the community, from citizens, or examples that are happening on the ground to identify that, that the parallel, which would help tell the story in a much more, nuanced manner. I think these were two, frames that I was, trying to identify in the process of highlighting some of these stories. What was rightly also pointed out was that it becomes quite complicated when you're unable to identify what the data is, because we're not scientists ourselves to do that. But the process from the scientist end to explain it has emerged and become something which is, an important element from their side to explain to us for our reporting, because they know that if there is some amount of misquoting that happens, this could have repercussions not just for a region, but for much larger geography. So I think those are some elements that I think which have helped. The other is downscaling some of that, in a way where the story becomes more precise and readable. You have, the intersection of both the integrity of science and opening it up for public engagement. So how do you get both of these to come together when, you're highlighting the story? Something that we worked on, at ASR, there was this thing called Simplifying Science itself. Like, it was a program where we tried to identify multiple different, researchers, scientists to come together and, help us with these recently published research papers. We tried to keep it, sort of new in a way where if there's something happening externally, how do you highlight that and get that into the researching frame, or, the storytelling structure in that way? So we used to develop like a 2-page simplified version of that extremely detailed research paper and try to get as many quotes as possible, so that whatever is being explained in a very, very detailed manner is broken down in simple structured quotes. So themselves trying to explain it in a simple way, and then reaching out to different journalists, reporters, etc., trying to understand from them what is it that they would like to know more. Also getting in the views of community to understand if this example actually makes some amount of resonance in the way that they are living life. So I think that aspect of getting the community's voice within that research frame also would allow for a lot of these subjects to be broken down and brought to that some sort of synergy and coherence in reporting.
That makes, I mean, there is, of course, an overlap between what I've asked here. And I understand that the scientists are far more open to the idea of discussing what they're doing because of the accountability fact that you brought out. And I think maybe because we have far more younger researchers also very open with their research also, I think that helps. And this having, as you said, like workshops where it's easier to read scientific papers and interpret it for a story. I think that makes a lot of sense, doing something like that for climate change publications and stories. Usmi, when we talk about your stories on gender health impacts and salinity and all, we were just going through it. That it requires a lot of data verification and a lot of sensitive engagement with these women who are having these gender health issues. How do you know when a story is ready? Like, that is something, like, when do you know it's balanced enough that it's now time for you to publish it? Have you how do you go about getting it from all angles? Is that something that we would love to hear from you?
So basically what I do is that after I have answered the 5 W's in a story, I move on to read it. That if I was a reader, what would I want to know more about it? What is something uh, which is lacking? I mean, maybe not lacking, but what is something which will make the story more understandable and more convincing than it is? Like the Kochi story which you are mentioning, the about the salinity and things like that. So I think the biggest challenge in that story was that how do you link an everyday problem of why there is a water shortage to something like rising salinity. So for that, I spent days listening to how residents describe salinity in their own terms, not as a scientific problem but as something that enters their kitchen and lives. So that really helped to break it down simply. Now another thing which I do is that if I think the story is perfect and it has everything, I tend to get biased. So I ask someone in my family or maybe a colleague to read it and tell me what is it lacking. And over time you recognize one colleague who was very critical of your work and is going to find a loophole. And once you do that and you try to fill that loophole, so your story only gets better. So I think positive criticism was also something which I learned along the way, that it benefits us all.
That makes that makes sense, Osme. Like if you share your story beforehand with people, with colleagues who can give you a feedback on your, even if you are using too much of scientific jargon, maybe it helps
Yeah.
to simplify it. Here, I just maybe at last in this scientific question, I'd like Varsha to can you just help us understand, Varsha, like you because you're covering the fragile Himalayan ecosystem. How do you weave local or indigenous knowledge into your coverage? Because a lot of these people have their own their own indigenous way of doing things, and when you're explaining things in your articles, is there any way that you bring into uh, bring their knowledge into your story and break down complex processes into a language that can connect with the reader, especially for living in the plains and and you're writing about the mountains? How do you bridge that?
तो शर्मिष्ठा, जो सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट बात है कि वही लोगों की स्टोरीज को सुनना, क्योंकि जब हम फील्ड में जाते हैं और हम किसी स्टोरी पर काम कर रहे होते हैं तो एक स्टोरी लाइन हमारे दिमाग में पहले से फिक्स होती है। और बहुत सारा रिसर्च पहले से करके जाते हैं, बहुत सारे पेपर्स भी कुछ पढ़ लेते हैं, उसके आसपास जो स्टोरीज हैं वो भी पढ़ लेते हैं। लेकिन जब हम लोगों के बीच जाते हैं या जैसे मैं बहुत पहले 3 4 5 साल पहले की बात बोलूं, तो मैं पौड़ी के गांव में गई थी। तो अभी क्लाइमेट वो कॉप कॉन्फ्रेंस होने वाली थी और उस पर एक स्टोरी उससे पहले करनी थी। तो क्लाइमेट चेंज लोग किस तरह से देख रहे हैं, क्या वो वाकिफ हैं कि ये क्लाइमेट चेंज क्या होता है? तो लोगों को ये नहीं मालूम कि जो ये वर्ड्स हैं, ये जो या साइंटिफिक जर्गॉन्स हैं कि ये क्या है। लेकिन जब आप उनसे बात करेंगे, जब आप उनको उनकी लैंग्वेज में आकर के पूछेंगे, तो वो बताएंगे कि हाँ, अब बारिश समय समय पर नहीं होती जैसे पहले होती थी, या अब जब बारिश होती है तो एक साथ ही हमारे खेत में आ जाती है और सारी फसल चौपट हो जाती है। पहले तो वो बात वही कह रहे होते हैं जो साइंटिस्ट कहते हैं कि अब बारिश, वो रिमझिम बारिश नहीं होती है, वो एक साथ बहुत ही इंटेंस रेनफॉल हो जाती है। और कई बार बल्कि ये जो कम्युनिटी है ये ज्यादा आपको साइंटिफिक नॉलेज देगी अपने एक्सपीरियंसेस से, बजाय इसके जो साइंटिस्ट दे रहे होंगे, क्योंकि वो उस चीज को फेस कर रहे होते हैं। तो जब उत्तराखंड में खास तौर पे भी हम देखेंगे कि क्लाउड बर्स्ट को लेकर बहुत सारी बातचीत होती है, और क्लाउड बर्स्ट है क्या, हम उसकी डेफिनेशंस बनाई हुई हैं। लेकिन जब कोई एक गांव कहता है कि ऐसी बारिश आई कि उनके घर तबाह हो गए, उनके पशुओं की छानी हट गई, या मलबे से भर गया वो इलाका, और ये क्लाउड बर्स्ट है, और साइंटिस्ट कम्युनिटी कहती है कि नहीं नहीं, बारिश तो इतने हुई है, ये क्लाउड बर्स्ट की कैटेगरी में नहीं आता है। तो कई बार जो उनकी जो नॉलेज है या जो उनका जो नुकसान है या जो डेफिनेशन है, हम उसको भी, और उस पर रिस्पॉन्सेज भी आते हैं, वो साइंटिफिक कम्युनिटी की तरफ से भी वो रिस्पॉन्सेज आते हैं कि अब वो क्लाउड बर्स्ट की जगह मिनी क्लाउड बर्स्ट इवेंट जैसे बात करने लग गए हैं, क्योंकि वो बारिश जो प्लेन्स में होगी या जो पहाड़ में होगी, दोनों को हम एक तरह से नहीं देख सकते हैं। तो जो जो ये जो साइंस है वो लोगों से बात करके, उनकी कहानियां सुन के, उनसे कुछ और हम जब अपने जो इतनी सारी नॉलेज लेकर जाते हैं, जब हम वो भी उनके साथ शेयर करते हैं, तो कई बार वो बहुत काम की, बहुत ऐसी कोई एक छोटा सेंटेंस, कोई एक ऐसी बात बताएंगे जो आपको क्लिक कर जाती है कि ये एक्चुअली स्टोरी है, ये कहानी है, ऐसा होता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि लोगों की बातों को सुनना ही बहुत एनरिचिंग एक्सपीरियंस है खुद में। और आपको बहुत सारा साइंस वहां से मिलता है, जो साइंटिस्ट भी अगर उन तक पहुंचे हो, और साइंटिस्ट बेसिकली वो करते भी हैं, जब वो रिसर्च के लिए जाते हैं, जब वो फील्ड में जाते हैं और वो इन कम्युनिटी के बीच में रह करके जब बातचीत करते हैं, तब जो रियल इनपुट्स है वो मिलते हैं। जी।
आप सही कह रहे हैं वर्षा. Good strong reminder that good science communication is not about only simplifying and making facts fewer. It's also about making that connection to humans. So when science feels personal, people also start to care. And when we, as we've already actually, because there's such an overlap, and as Nidhi had started off with how there's so many layers to a story when we are doing covering climate change. No one can tell the full story of climate change alone. Researchers hold the data, journalists hold the narrative, and communities live this experience. The real magic happens when we all work together. And in some ways, we've already covered this, but I would still like to bring in Usmi. Usmi, your reporting often connects grassroots realities with governance gaps, from gender responsive climate policy to global partnerships. From your experience, how close can journalists get to advocacy while still staying independent and fair? So, I mean, like we sometimes, I can see all of you are so passionate about your stories, but, sometimes when people, I've seen that when it can happen that when journalists write with a lot of passion, some, I'm not going to say all, but a lot of times in the policymakers area, it is taken as an activism happening. Okay, and how do you so? And then if you don't write with that amount of passion, it kind of then you're not connecting with the people because they don't see the urgency of your story. So how do you bring that balance so you don't come out? You're not being an advocate as such, but you're balancing your story, being very independent and fair. So how do you see this? This how to work with everybody, take that story together. Can we have something about it from you, Usmi?
Yeah, so just yesterday I was in Outer Delhi. I had met a family of a sanitation worker, and when I had gone there, I can't describe the situation they were in, and they had taken leave for me. So it's like the three little girls work along with their mother, and they all have taken leave, and it was like 200 rupees per day which they earn, which is like from what they buy their daily grocery and all. So I was really moved. So they took out time, they spoke to me about the issues and everything, and there was no way I could help them. So that is something which really, that is a conundrum or a problem which I have, that how to help them, because I know that if I go back and I write a story on them, it is not going to bring immediate impact, and if it brings any impact, it would be a great thing, but there are no immediate benefits. So what I try to do is that when I'm writing a story, again, take a step back and try to look at it from a perspective, because the stories, when you're doing it from the ground, they're extremely moving and they are extremely emotional. So there have been times which, again, I have asked someone's help to just go through it, that because you don't want to be portrayed as a reporter who's telling sobbing stories. You want to lay out the facts and let the readers decide about how they feel about this particular person. So that is something which is another thing which I try to do, that I try to give them as many details as possible without putting any of my own opinions in a story. So that helps. That kind of neutralizes you and tells you that okay, fine, so this person is not biased and is not advocating for any specific cause. But yes, it's a very big issue which I think I face day to day basis, and it takes a toll on my mental health, and I am still trying to figure out a solution. So no proper answer to this. It's case by case basis.
It's not easy at all, is it? I mean, to separate yourself from some of these issues at hand. And I think if we talk about changing the language or the narrative a little here. Patri, it was very interesting to read an article of yours about moving away from terms like wastelands and reframing land use narratives. How can collaboration with scientists or local organizations help reshape how the public and policymakers think about land? And we would love to hear from you about this article of yours about, not using terms like these old archaic terms like wasteland.
So, if you recall, the wastelands term is something that's actually come from the colonial structures, where it's like fallow land, which was like not really used over time. I think the focus on that was more so an interview article where we looked at commons, and commons could mean pasture land, it could mean agriculture land, it could mean all sorts of different types of ecological commons, and then you have like knowledge, digital commons, and so on. There are multiple things. Within the ecological framework itself, like communities have always had this notion which exists that communities cannot manage their own affairs is something that is sort of pushed away, and to identify the aspect of self-governance, where they have their own rules, they have their own guidelines, and that's all across our country. And to highlight that with and balance that out with the top-heavy policy-related movements that are happening on a regular basis, then if you keep the perspective of wastelands, and today if you see renewable energy projects, while they are moving towards a target that the government is looking to identify, the 500 gigawatt and so on. These wastelands are actually areas which are owned by these communities, or they don't have an ownership. So terming them as wastelands itself can identify that okay, they're not in use, but they actually are lands that can be made cultivable, that can be used by communities for multiple different purposes. So how do we move away from that notion and identify the best use of that land, while ensuring that the conflicts that can arise are also balanced in nature? So I think here the reporting structure is crucial in ensuring that while you're doing the conflict stated reporting, you have to have a solutions lens attached with it, where you look at what could be the alternative ideas when you're looking at these sort of areas overall across the country. And there are many. Now, especially Rajasthan, the scale is increasing significantly. Recent reports have identified that. So how do you look at identifying these places which can be seen as barren, but there are multiple different uses that can be provided for this, and those use cases need to be identified. Just one other thing, Sharmisha, just going back to your previous question and connecting it to this, even from the scientific lens, if you see now, what originally, weather used to be like a specific focus area, and it used to be part of daily beat reporting, that you had weather stories every day. Steadily over time, especially urban areas, the scale of urbanization, population growth, vehicles, and so on, you see that air pollution also became akin to the layer of regular reporting that weather is. Like terms like PM 2.5, PM 10, air quality index, and all of these things, which initially seemed to be very, jargon heavy, it sort of became mainstream over time, with regular reports coming out both at the vernacular stage as well as, and now it's also gone where there's rural reporting happening on the kind of air quality that's there. So I think that shows the transition over time of how reporting structures, understanding how it can be adapted and then moved on into creating. So I think that is a great identification of how we'll be able to adapt and build that balance. Just wanted to bring that point.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you brought out. What started out as jargon has now become everyday terminology is being used for everyone. And that's how I think if you bring out words, people who are not used to certain words, like even I think nobody even thought about, how using a word like wasteland is negatively affecting it in so many ways. Like how even I think in the scientific, in the conservation sector also, if we, it kind of affects there also. If you start using it in a different way, maybe there'll be more people working this whole as an ecosystem, that whole wasteland as a so-called ecosystem, like grasslands or anywhere, as we've been seeing in the previous land-based mitigation dialogues being done by Iora. I mean, it's just about how we use these terms, because we never think of it as as a ecosystem of its own, or maybe wasteland is just something that is of no use, whereas it is not so, as your articles show us. Nidhi, when we talk about working closely with communities, NGOs, and researchers across India, what makes those collaborations work well, and what challenges or boundaries should journalists be mindful of when working alongside researchers? As from your own experience in all these years, is there something that you feel, when we work with different communities or say researchers or NGOs, is there some any challenges that you came across, or some boundary issues that maybe you could talk to us about?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll take up from what Uzmi was also saying. I think that's like a what should I say, situation most of us feel, where we visit with a story, you get somewhere emotionally attached also to your story and to the people. And when you see people suffering, whether it because of of climate disasters or whatever, and you feel I can't help, I can't do anything. I think as journalists, it has happened with me also a lot of times, when you visit a village and they will ask you that आपको बताने से हमें क्या फायदा होगा. That's a question I've heard so many times. So it's also very important for us to at that time tell ourselves that I'm a journalist, I'm a storyteller. You have to just keep repeating that to yourself, because it's very difficult. You are not going to really solve their problem immediately. Your job is you do the story and you ensure that possibly the story reaches the right circle, so that some change can happen over a period of time. So I think that's one thing. So when you're talking of challenge, it's very important to try and always tell yourself, go 2 steps back and remind yourself you are a journalist, you are on a reporting assignment. So I think that's a very, very important thing, whether you're collaborating. So sometimes, even if I'm collaborating with somebody, I am very clear. I will say right away that, I am a journalist. So even if I'm going to the field doing a story, I will wear my journalist hat and I will do the story from that perspective. It's not a lot of times people say, is it a positive story? Is it a negative? So many times, even in Gaon Correction, people used to pitch story, they used to tell me, ma'am, positive story karna hai ya negative story karna? And I'm like, what does that mean? What is a positive story? What is a negative story? You go to the field, you find out, and I'm sure even the most positive stories will have some challenges. So the important thing is that you look at the story in totality without trying to put it under the thing of it's a positive story, it's a solutions journalism, or it is whatever. It has to be a complete story. So I think that's very, very important. And as far as another, I think, bigger challenge, a lot of time journalists, independent journalists face when doing these stories is also their security and safety. I think it's becoming a big challenge now, because the kind of areas you are going to, when I went to this Rohiniya Damar village that I was talking about on Jharkhand Sonbhadra border, it was a Naxalite affected area. I could also go because somewhere I had the backing of my magazine, Down to Earth, which is well known. I knew if something goes wrong, I will have certain protection. I think that's a challenge. You will see most climate environment journalists today are independent journalists. They are very few of them are working in the mainstream media now. So the challenge for all of us is, how do we ensure our security, our safety when we go to the field to report on these very complex, maybe scary stories, I think. And I don't have any answer for that, but I really want to flag that issue also, because it affects all of us.
You're absolutely right, Nidhi. I mean, just as you rightly pointed out about working from remote regions here, I'd like to bring Varsha in. Varsha, you're reporting from the Himalayan belt, and it deals, I mean, if you're going for field reporting, you're dealing with remoteness, limited access, safety risks, just like Nidhi has just mentioned. What kind of support networks or collaborations make it possible to tell these stories from the ground up for you specifically, if your area of reporting is the Himalayas?
तो जैसे अभी निधि ने कहा कि हम एज एन इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिस्ट जब काम कर रहे थे, तो हमारे पास कोई न्यूज़ रूम का बैकअप सपोर्ट नहीं होता है कि और ऐसे रीजन में, ऐसे टेरेन में जा रहे होते हैं जहाँ हम खुद नए होते हैं, और किसी एक ऐसे व्यक्ति, क्योंकि कई बार हम जो कम्युनिटी रीच आउट करते हैं कि कोई व्यक्ति या संस्था वहाँ काम करे, तो उनके साथ बात करके आगे बढ़ते हैं तो हम उन्हें भी बहुत अच्छी तरह नहीं जानते हैं। तो लेकिन उसके बावजूद जो हमारी कोशिश होती है कि हम कैसे अपना एक जो रिपोर्टिंग प्लान है वो बहुत फुल प्रूफ बना करके फिर आगे बढ़ें कि प्लान ए और प्लान बी भी हमारे पास है कि अगर कोई चीज़ क्लिक नहीं करती तो किस तरह से काम करें। और ये जो टाइम है, हालांकि अभी मिस्टर डोनाल्ड ट्रम्प से ठीक पहले ये जो डिसीजंस ट्रम्प गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से आए हैं या यूसेड जैसे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस पे जिस तरह की रोक लगी है, अगर हम उससे पहले देखें तो इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिज्म का ये एरा है। ये जो जो इन्वायरमेंटल जर्नलिज्म को आप देखोगे और इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिज्म को आप देखोगे, ये साथ साथ चल रहे हैं, क्योंकि ऐसे बहुत सारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस अब आपके पास हैं जो इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिस्ट को सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं थ्रू ग्रांट, थ्रू फेलोशिप, सो दैट यू कैन ट्रेवल टू दोज एरिया और आप वहाँ जाकर रह सकते हैं। आप रिसर्च के लिए कुछ टाइम स्पेंड कर सकते हैं और एक स्टोरी पर बहुत अच्छा इन डेप्थ काम कर सकते हैं, जो कई बार अगर आप किसी न्यूज़ रूम में एम्प्लॉय हैं तो शायद आपको वो चांस नहीं मिलेगा, इतना टाइम आप किसी एक स्टोरी को डेडिकेट नहीं कर पाओगे। इसलिए इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिज्म बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट है और ये जो टाइम है ये बहुत अपॉर्चुनिटीज हैं एक तरह से कहें तो फ्रीलांसर्स के लिए, कि आपके पास इस तरह के ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हैं और बहुत सारे अब एनजीओ जो आपको सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं कि आप जाइए, आप वो स्टोरी कीजिए। और तो ये चांसेस हैं। और इसके अलावा फिर जो हम अपना रिपोर्टिंग प्लान, फील्ड ट्रिप प्लान आउट करते हैं, वो यही होता है कि हम कैसे अपनी सेफ्टी को भी देखें। हमारे पास कुछ ऐसे कॉन्टैक्ट डिटेल्स हों जहाँ, या हम कहाँ पे रहने जा रहे हैं, हम किन से मिलने जा रहे हैं, कौन सी लोकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, कौन वहाँ पर लोकल एक्टिव लोग हैं जो वहाँ पर काम कर रहे होते हैं, तो उनसे किस तरह से आप टाई अप कर लें, उनके साथ फिर आप आगे बढ़ें। तो वो आई थिंक कि वो एक बेस्ट वे होता है। और मैंने आपका जो आपका मेन क्वेश्चन था वो मिस कर दिया कि एक्चुअली मैं
नहीं
आंसर।
नहीं, वर्षा, आपने बिल्कुल हमें क्लियर कर दिया। इनफैक्ट इसी से मिलता जुलता अभी हम नेक्स्ट सेक्शन में जा रहे हैं,
ओके।
where we talking about how do we strengthen environmental journalism now. See, environmental journalism often we struggle, आपने जैसे सही कहा कि वर्ल्ड में आपके news agencies, and if you're working with a bigger organization, of course there are politics and there are other breaking news which are always going to be forefront. So how do you bring your like how do you strengthen environmental journalism? How do you break that? How do you cross that? So मैं independent journalism के बारे में अभी आपको second question पूछूं है. First I will go to Usmi here, because Usmi, you're working with PTI. And I would like to know that, because you're working with a such a major news agency where politics often dominates headlines, what have you learned about pitching and framing environmental stories so they still get editorial space and impact? We'll come to independent journalism and why I think a lot of environment journalists especially go into independent journalism. But you, Usmi, like, because you work with PTI, can we get a take from you, please?
So, climate and health stories often compete with political headlines. You have very rightly said that.
Yeah.
But I have learned that the timing and framing are everything. So when I pitch a story, I look for a hook that aligns with the news cycle. So, for instance, connecting heat stress among workers to the right to cool debate, or say linking pollution curbs to construction workers' livelihoods. So that is something which keeps the editors interested. And what keeps editors invested is, when the story, it combines urgency, evidence, and solution. So along with that, I think consistency also matters. So if you are delivering reliable, deeply reported pieces, editors start trusting that these so-called slow stories are just as impactful as daily stories. And having said all of that, I mean, I know PTI is a news agency, but we don't have that rush for the front page, because we honestly don't have we don't have limited space. We can get
Yes.
out as many stories as we can. So that is a very big advantage. And if you have supportive editors who believe in you, then it becomes even more easier. So yeah, those are my two
Yeah.
cents.
No. I agree. And Nidhi, sorry, we're coming back to you again. As an independent journalist, I mean, is that something you consciously made that decision because you wanted to cover environment and climate change, and it was easier working as an independent journalist. Is that something what made you make this decision of working independently? And also, it's not. I mean, when we say working as an independent journalist, it's not like you can just you are obviously working with editors and like convincing editors for stories, or if you've already written a story, approaching people who are, I mean, you are too senior for all of that, but how do you see that? How do you convince people that we can go for this slow, deeply researched environmental story, and that it deserves the attention in fast-paced news cycles? How do you go about it? So I get two questions in this one. Like, why did you think of going independent? And
Yeah, I'll just quickly answer. One is
yeah,
that I don't think there is anything called senior journalist. So I
right,
think I
absolutely,
really never call myself a senior journalist. A journalist is
yes,
a journalist. Doesn't matter 5 years
yeah,
experience, 25 years experience, because that makes your job very easy. Even now,
yeah,
when I'm working as an independent journalist, after 25 years of experience, I have no shame in pitching stories to editors, and I have no shame in answering queries in my copy. And I've worked with a lot of young journalists who find it just surprising that when they file a copy, there are some 10 queries in the copy, and they just say that we are not used to answering queries in a copy because they've just not been trained that way. So I think that one thing is that's very important, that you are a journalist, doesn't matter
yeah,
your experience, and you have to pitch your story, you have to sell your story to the editor, and you have to convince the editor that why your story should be accepted. Now, as far as going independent is concerned, I would say of the 25 years of my life as a journalist, 12 years I spent with Down to Earth, 5 years I've spent with Down Connection, and the rest of it has been independent. The reason being because, again, I am not into fast journalism. I am not chasing, stories and, headlines. Being independent has always given me space to work on my stories at my own pace. So, and I think, after I quit Down to Earth after 12 years there, and when I started doing independent journalism, and I kind of, it became addictive, to be very honest. It actually became an addiction where I was like, this is the kind of work I want to do. I love Down to Earth. I still write for them. I think I owe everything to what I've learned at that place. But being independent, what also happens is it allows you more space to do the kind of stories you want to do at your own pace, because you are not following every 15 days the magazine has to close, or your story schedule. So I think that freedom is something I enjoy, because that also allows me to mingle with a lot of people. I think I've traveled to almost all the states of the country, again as an independent journalist, because it gives me that time. If I have to go for a training program for 5 days, I don't have to seek permission from an editor. I can just go because there is nobody. So I think that's there. The second thing is, when you're pitching stories, what it's become very easy now, to be honest, to pitch climate and environment stories, because every story is a climate story today. Whether you're talking of health, you're talking of export, import, you're talking of transboundary issues, India, Pakistan issues, everything is a climate story today. The challenge becomes, what is the new angle you will get in your story? Everybody is, as an independent journalist, there are, I'm sure, thousands of journalists pitching their stories to these platforms. So what new angle, what in-depth story will you pitch, which will ensure that your story gets picked up? So you have to really think of what different angle you will bring, and trust me, that angle only comes through three things: travel, travel, and travel. That's the only thing which will get you new angles for your story. I'll just pause there.
Thank you, Nidhi. That makes a lot of sense, actually. But I would also bring in Varsha here. Varsha, Nidhi talked about all the positives of being independent journalism. Can you tell us about your experience? Like, have you found working as an independent journalist, especially based in a different part of this country, like in the Himalayas? Does it bring its own unique challenges? And can you tell us about how regional journalists bring local climate stories into national attention, and how does working independently as a journalist, what are the challenges that you face?
तो हनिदी ने जो बात की वो एक इसका पॉजिटिव साइड है,
हाँ
पर
जी,
नेगेटिव साइड्स भी हैं
जी,
इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिज्म के। पहला तो ये कि हमारे पास कोई फर्स्ट ऑफ किसी भी महीने की पहली तारीख को कोई इनकम नहीं आ रही होती है, जो कि हर जर्नलिस्ट के लिए बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट होती है। लेकिन इसके अलावा ये अगर हम देखें, हमारे पास कोई एक तो ये कोई बैकअप सपोर्ट नहीं होता, सबसे पहली बात यह है, क्योंकि स्टोरी तो जब पिच होती है और कहीं पर पब्लिश होती है उसके पहले आप बहुत सारा काम अकेले कर रहे होते हो, और आपके पास ऐसा कोई सिस्टम नहीं कि आप अपने एडिटर को बोलो, या एडिटर हालांकि बाद में आपकी कॉपी को देख रहे होते हैं, रिफाइन कर रहे होते हैं, और पहले भी हम एडिटर के साथ बातचीत कर रहे होते हैं कि क्या क्या एलिमेंट उस स्टोरी में होने चाहिए। इसके अलावा कई बार मुझे लगता है कि मैं एक जब मैं जॉब कर रही होती थी, मैंने भी कुछ साल जॉब किया है, मुझे लगता है कि मेरे पास पीस ऑफ माइंड था। मैं जब एक बार घर में आ गई तो फिर मेरा दिमाग शांत है। लेकिन अभी इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिज्म में आप शांत नहीं होते हो, आप हमेशा, आपको स्टोरीज दिख रही होती हैं, उसके एंगल्स दिख रहे होते हैं। और अगर आपके पास ज्यादा स्टोरीज है, लाइक 2 3 4 स्टोरीज है, तो आप सोचोगे कैसे ये वाला काम कर लूँ, फिर मैं अगली स्टोरी पर स्विच करूँ। अगर आपके पास काम नहीं है तो भी आप परेशान हो जाओगे कि ओ अब क्या होने वाला है। तो आप हमेशा एक जो आप 8 घंटे के वर्क साइकिल में जो नॉर्मली लोग रहते हैं, एज एन इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिस्ट, इट्स काइंड ऑफ एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप। आप हमेशा काम पर होते हो, आपके दिमाग में वो सोते समय भी वो एक आता है कि अब ये वाली स्टोरी पर काम करना है, ऐसे काम करना है, यूं काम करना है। और हम अपने लिए डेडलाइन भी खुद ही फिक्स कर रहे होते हैं, क्योंकि हम एक स्टोरी को लेकर बहुत टाइम तक भी नहीं बैठ सकते हैं। तो हमें मतलब उस पर्टिकुलर टाइम फ्रेम में काम करना होता है। तो ये एक इसका चैलेंज है। और जो दूसरी बात आपने कही कि जो लोकल, बेसिकली जो लोकल स्टोरीज हैं वो ही इंटरनेशनल स्टोरीज भी हैं। आप उसको किस तरह से देख रहे हो, किस एंगल से, जो एंगल की बात निधि कह रही थी कि आप उसे किस तरह से देख रहे हो, क्योंकि कई बार किसी अखबार में, जो अभी बताया भी था उन्होंने, कि बहुत छोटी सी कॉलम में एक स्टोरी आ जाती है, और जब आप उस स्टोरी को डिग इन करते हो, उसके पीछे जब रिसर्च करते हो, थोड़ा बात करते हो, तो आपको पता चलता है कि ये नेशनल स्टोरी है, फिर ये इंटरनेशनल स्टोरी भी है। मैंने एक स्टोरी की थी रैनी गांव की। रैनी गांव बहुत पॉपुलर गांव है, और तो वहां पर एक वहां की महिलाओं से मैंने बातचीत की थी 2021 का जो डिजास्टर था उसके बाद से। वो जो स्टोरी थी वो बहुत ही एक हाइपर लोकल स्टोरी भी थी, लेकिन उसके बाद मैंने देखा वो 4 5 6 लैंग्वेजेस में रिपब्लिश हुई, फ्रेंच में, जर्मन में। और वहाँ के जर्नलिस्ट ने मुझे कांटेक्ट किया। तो बेसिकली ये जो लोकल इश्यूज है, इसी के लिए आज जो रिसर्चर्स हैं वो भी जा रहे हैं, जो साइंटिस्ट हैं, आज हम जो पूरी जो कि कॉप कॉन्फ्रेंसेस हो रही हैं, नेचर बेस्ड सोल्यूशंस की बात कर रहे हैं, जो कार्बन मार्केट की बात कर रहे हैं, तो वो अल्टीमेटली कहाँ जाके एंड अप होती है, वो उन्हीं लोकल इश्यूज पे, उन्हीं लोगों के बीच की वो कुछ ऐसा क्या कर रहे हैं, वो अपने जंगल को बचा रहे हैं, अब वो जंगल एक कार्बन मार्केट का पार्ट हो सकता है। तो बेसिकली जो लोकल स्टोरीज हैं वही आपकी ग्लोबल ऑडियंस की स्टोरीज भी हैं। हम कैसे एज एन लोकल रिपोर्टर, एक लोकल जर्नलिस्ट को, रीजनल जर्नलिस्ट को, नेशनल लेवल, जैसे हम, वैसे ऐसी कोई कैटेगरी होती नहीं है, ये लोकल जर्नलिस्ट या नेशनल
जी
रिपोर्टर काइंड ऑफ, ये कैटेगरी नहीं है बेसिक। और अगर आप थोड़ी ट्रेनिंग सब तरफ पहुंच जाए, जो ये क्योंकि हम लोग खुद से खुद को स्किल, बहुत सारे ऐसे वर्कशॉप्स अब इस समय हो रही होती हैं, बहुत सारे ऐसे वेबिनार्स हो रहे होते हैं, जैसे ये एक कॉन्वर्जेशन है हमारा आपके साथ में, तो ये हमें और स्किल्ड करते हैं। तो हम लगातार इस
जी
तरह के वर्कशॉप्स को अटेंड कर रहे होते हैं अपने आप को स्किल्ड करने के लिए। तो अगर वो ये सारी चीजें उन बिल्कुल पहाड़ के गांव में बैठे जर्नलिस्ट के पास भी पहुंच जाएंगी, तो वो भी इतना ही चुप हो जाएगा, और वो इतनी बड़ी स्टोरी करेगा जिस पर हमारा आपका भी एक ध्यान होगा कि हम इसे करते हैं और इसे कैसे करते। तो हाँ, तो ये एक बात है। और इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिज्म, बेसिकली मैं कहूँगी कि मैंने अपने करियर में जो बेस्ट स्टोरीज की हैं वो एज एन इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिस्ट रहते हुए ही की है। मेरे पास ऑप्शन है कि मैं अपनी पसंद की स्टोरीज पर काम कर सकूं, और उससे जुड़े जो भी चैलेंजेस हैं फिर आप उसको फेस करने के लिए तैयार, इतना तो स्ट्रगल होता ही है किसी भी चीज में, तो वो आप उसे फेस कर सकते हैं।
जी वर्षा, आपने बिल्कुल सही किया। एक्चुअली देयर इज नो लोकल स्टोरी रियली नाउ विद एवरीवन, everything being so interconnected in this world, especially with climate change. Everything is affecting everything else. So we'll just take a few seconds with you, Badri, because I know you've already mentioned you're not really working in full-time journalism really now. But how has your experience been in those stories that you do cover, across urban beats? Like, how can journalists working within city-based newsrooms keep environment and land issues on the agenda amid, the competing other priorities like political news? Is this something that you have ever come across or faced in your, if you were working full-time as a journalist?
So if I had to go back to that timeline, it was like I was saying, it was something, and Usmi had actually pointed this out quite clearly that there's always that competition with politics, and city news also taking more prevalence than environment stories. But then again, there were as some of these issues cropping during the seasonality structures where there's heavy rainfall or there's heat stress that's happening, or because of the impacts due to weather or any other associated areas, there were stories that could be followed up from there on. So, if I remember, like, whether it be even plastic and emissions around going into plastic and how there are different aspects that, connect to it, with, different departments being involved, different, citizen groups that come in. So all of those. And then there's these times when, you have like a major issue, like RA at my time when I was reporting was something that became a major issue. Like the RA colony itself being like a forest within a cityscape. So those have the ability to have follow-up stories on a regular basis, and I think that within cities has was something that was prioritized by editors more than your other stories, and they do have a political lens to it. So you used to also have a complementary reporter with you, who's also reporting it from a political lens while you're reporting it from an environmental lens. So, in those cases, those stories take a lot more. So, yes.
Thank you, Badri. These are some really good points that we've all brought up today for our fellow and future communicators. As pointed out by a couple of you, like if we can have more of such conversations and workshops for people who are working or who want to work in environmental journalism or climate change communication. So I think this is a great platform to learn from people who are already working in it, and also, as environment and climate change journalists, I think your work is so powerful because through your stories, you're bridging science, policy, and people, and turning awareness into understanding, and this understanding then becomes into action. So communication, we know, isn't separate from climate action. It is climate action. It is a part. It is exactly climate action here. So, because I know this, we can go on with this because it's a very interesting conversation. We can go on for hours because we have limited time. So I will just quickly thank Usmi, Nidhi, Badri, and Varsha for such an insightful and heartfelt discussion, and to everyone who joined us live today. And I'd like to now hand it back to Priyamvada to formally close the session.
Thanks, Sharmishta, and I know we have overshot by 15 minutes already. I'll just because it was so interesting to listen to this entire conversation. I think the panel members have given all the upcoming or budding communicators, journalists, kind of a framework to how to write, starting from developing a nose to look for stories, the importance of maintaining consistency in their reportage, or looking for layers in data science, the stakeholders, breaking them in the complexity into simpler terms, connecting with the lived experiences, and very importantly, getting the story reviewed by a third person. And also very importantly, not getting attached emotionally to the story, remembering the role that they're playing, avoiding conflict of interest through, attaching a solutions lens to the stories that they're writing. So I'm sure this particular webinar has been very enriching for the upcoming journalists. I'll just close with a line that Nidhi and Varsha quoted, because that I think it's very pertinent in today's time when climate is really the overarching challenge that we are all facing with. One is Varsha, you said that local stories are international stories, and that is where we can also say that climate change forced scientists to speak to journalists so that it can become a regular talk and people can be made more aware. So thank you for all these pearls of wisdom that you've shared with us from your vast experiences. We also thank the members who've joined us over LinkedIn Live. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Thank you a lot.